Welcome to Third Eye Weekly. Joining us today is Alan Gibbs, Professor of Life Sciences at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He's here to talk with us about his unique approach in researching obesity through fruit flies. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So let's start out first with understanding how you first came interested in this line of study.
I'm sort of generally interested in how animals deal with environmental stress. So we've studied things like desiccation stress, heat, cold, and lack of food is just another type of stress that we've been working on. And mostly use fruit flies as a model because it's really convenient.
And fruit flies have often been used to study obesity. What makes your study unique in its experimentation with obese fruit flies?
So other people have made flies obese by doing things like feeding them a high sugar diet. And you can also do genetic manipulations to make flies fat. What we did instead was what we call experimental evolution. So what we would do is every generation you take 10,000 flies, you put them in a cage about this big, and you take away their food. And when 9,000 are dead, you feed the survivors. And then the next generation, you put 10,000 flies in a cage, you take away their food, you breed the 1,000 survivors. And basically what you end up doing is selecting for flies that are genetically able to survive without food. And one way to do this is to be really fat. And my flies are really fat.
Yeah, they're about 50% larger than the average fruit fly. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's almost all fat.
Chubby little guys.
Yeah.
What was some of the process like, in deciding to do this back in 2007 and now coming to the experiment recently?
So we've basically just been doing this for 98 generations now. And what we did is as time went on, we would periodically check, how fat are they, how long do they survive, and then had graduate students working on things like development time, sleep behavior, and then another student who decided that he thought heart function would be interesting.
Yeah, what were some of the discoveries that you found in investigating the obese-related heart dysfunction?
So basically, the flies are so fat and they have so much adipose tissue that it actually presses on the heart, and so the heart gets basically physically put out of place. And so if you look at the heart function, a normal fly heart would contract like this. What these flies have is a distended heart and it doesn't contract well. So basically it doesn't pump as much blood, or hemolymph is what insect blood is called. So that's basically a problem for them.
And fruit flies are usually chosen to for this study because they're so similar to humans. How does this translate to how humans react to their hearts in obesity?
That's what we want to find out. So what we've have found out, we've also been doing genetic studies and sequencing the DNA of our flies. And if you take the candidate genes that we have and look for human homologs of those genes, the human versions, what we find is we actually find a lot of the genes that look like candidates are also involved in cardiac dysfunction in humans. So now we have some sort of confirming evidence, but we can also in flies do genetic manipulations and see exactly what those genes are doing. And chances are there's a very, very, very good chance that the genes are doing exactly the same thing in humans. So now we have potentially targets for proteins that are not functioning properly in human hearts, and that means they're targets for pharmaceuticals that could potentially help with heart patients.
So it sounds like this is making it easier to understand the complex link between obesity and cardiovascular diseases.
Yeah, so what's happens with all these very complicated systems is that you don't have one gene that makes you have a bad heart. You might have some that have major effects. What we can do in our type of study is basically find many genes with sort of smaller effects, but also that interact with each other. And the interactions are what really makes the system work, is how do these different genes interact with each other to get proper heart function. And if one is screwed up, that's going to have cascading consequences for heart function in general.
So what are some examples of those interactions that cause heart failure?
So one thing that we found, a couple of genes that we found that are very interesting to us potentially are, we found changes in the insulin receptor, the protein that binds insulin, and we've also found changes in one of the types of fruit fly insulin. So fruit flies actually have 7 different types, and one of them, which is that has changed, that we've selected on, is I think potentially very interesting in terms of actually storing fat, because insulin and insulin signaling in cells is very important in fat storage and obesity.
Where would you like to see the future research in this field head towards?
Well, the direction we're going in 2 directions. One is the genetic approach, identifying genes that might cause obesity and heart disease, and disrupted sleep, which we also see in these flies, and inactivity, which is another thing we see in these flies. So going after those types of genes with collaborators. And the other thing that we're just starting now is we're interested in the microbes that live in their guts. So one thing that's shown up recently in mammals, mice, humans to some extent, is that the types of bacteria in your gut strongly affect how much fat you store, how obese you are. And our preliminary data shows that our fat flies have different microbes from the skinny flies, but now we can actually, in fruit flies, sort of test specific types of bacteria. We can make our flies sterile and basically reinfect them with other bacteria and test what the bacteria are doing. This is very hard in humans because you have hundreds of different types of bacteria in your guts, in my guts. In flies, it's 10 or 20. It's a much simpler system.
Do you think that your new way of using the evolutionary process to create these fatter fruit flies, is that going to be now the sort of go-to process in researching fruit flies?
Probably not, because most people who work on fruit flies are geneticists. They're interested in 1 or 2 genes at a time. But experimental evolution is being used more widely now for other types of things. So there are a lot of people doing it right now for just, it's sort of trying to mimic what happens in nature in the laboratory in a very simple system. So, for people who are interested in evolution, this is a way of studying it in the lab under controlled conditions and much more rapidly than what you could do in nature.
That's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Alan. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was happy to do it.